Naomi Bennett stepped onto Pacific Wings Flight PW 512 just as the sun was rising over Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Even at 5:30 in the morning, the first-class cabin felt hushed and almost reverent. Soft amber lights glowing against ivory leather, polished walnut inlays gleaming under her fingertips as she ran them along the armrest. She'd flown enough to appreciate every tiny detail of luxury travel, but today she noticed every nuance. Her custom couture sheath dress caught the light just so, and her signature silk scarf trailed behind like a banner of quiet authority. At 50 years old, Naomi was used to commanding attention, but she never expected to be dismissed. Sliding into seat 2A, she positioned her carry-on at her feet and allowed herself a brief smile. Lumiere Fashion Group's quarterly earnings had just come in at $500 million, and Naomi's team was celebrating across 3 continents. She had negotiated the brand's latest couture line launch only days ago, and the champagne toasts had already begun back in Los Angeles. Yet, as she settled into this cocoon of comfort, part of her mind remained locked on the meeting she had scheduled at LAX. An emergency call with her general counsel to finalize a $200 million 0-cents acquisition of Pacific Wings itself. In less than an hour, this plane would be hers. Moments later, with the seatbelt sign still illuminated, a flight attendant appeared. Karen Whitfield, petite, perfectly coiffed, platinum blonde, her smile just warm enough to be polite. Naomi extended her menu. "I'd like to start with your Wagyu beef and..." She paused, letting her tone convey both courtesy and expectation. "The Dom Perignon, please." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. She flipped to the back of the leather-bound menu with a tiny sigh. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We've actually run out of those premium items for this flight." Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry?" Her voice was steady, but inside she felt an immediate zing of disbelief. She'd booked this cabin weeks ago, at double the standard first-class rate no less, and she'd confirmed her menu preferences during check-in. Running out of Dom Perignon? Wagyu? In first class? It didn't compute. She watched as Karen hovered, waiting for a response. Around her, other passengers, well-dressed executives, older couples with diamond pins, had already been offered glasses of vintage champagne and little plates of caviar. Naomi's seatmate, an Asian-American venture capitalist who she vaguely recognized from a tech conference poster, sipped his flute without a care in the world. Meanwhile, Naomi's glass remained empty. Suppressing the sudden rush of heat to her cheeks, Naomi drew in a slow breath. "I understand inventory is tight," she said, keeping her tone conversational, "but I had specifically requested those items." Karen offered a polite tilt of the head. "Of course, ma'am, but priority goes to our elite frequent flyers and partners. We'd hate to disappoint them by overpromising." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Excuse me? Partners?" She caught Karen's colleague at the galley, Bradley Thompson, smirking as if they shared some private joke. Naomi's mind flashed back to every boardroom she'd entered where people assumed she didn't belong, where they saw her as an outsider in a male-dominated world. She'd learned to choose her moments, to let her work speak first. But the humiliation of being overlooked in front of her peers, her competitors, was a different kind of sting. Swallowing the urge to fire off a scathing retort, Naomi leaned back, folded her arms, and gazed at the cabin's gleaming ceiling panels. The hum of the engines felt louder now, almost mocking. The silence around her seemed to press in, and for an instant she doubted herself. Had she misread the reservation? Did she somehow slip through the cracks? Then anger settled in her chest like molten iron. It wasn't just about the beef or the champagne, it was the message behind the refusal, that even here, in this sacred bubble of privilege, she could be relegated to not special enough. Naomi had faced prejudice before, but this time it was personal and public. She glanced at the small window where Tokyo's spires receded beneath the sunrise and steeled herself. "I'd like a different bottle of champagne," she said softly, but with enough firmness that Karen paused. "And please, bring me the menu for standard service too." As Karen turned away, Naomi's jaw set. She was already drafting her internal memo, her public statement about equal treatment and corporate culture. She almost smiled at the irony. She was about to finalize a deal that would give her control of this very airline, and they had no idea. But those to whom much is given must demand respect. She would ensure that no one else, no matter how subtle the slight, would ever feel this small in first class again. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Naomi reached for her phone, thumb hovering over her secret shortcut to call her general counsel. This flight was about to change, from one of the most humiliating experiences of her career to the moment she'd seize undeniable authority. And it all started here, at seat 2A. 25 years earlier, Naomi was a teenager hacking together dresses in her parents' cramped garage in Santa Monica. Her first creations sold for $50 a piece at a local weekend market, barely covering the cost of fabric. But it was enough to light a fire inside her. She scraped together every cent she earned from tutoring geometry to buy her first industrial sewing machine. Late nights became her norm. Pattern cutting under flickering garage bulbs, fabric swatches pinned to every inch of drywall, and jazz records spinning on the stereo as she stitched hem after hem. By the time she was 22, Lumiere had outgrown that garage. Naomi moved her operations into a former photo studio in downtown LA. Flooring bright white, racks of her original couture frames lining the walls. She had just landed her first magazine spread, 3 pages in Modern Vogue, featuring her hand-beaded evening gowns. It felt like a dream, but success never came without pushback. At trade shows, buyers would ask to see her real designer, certain she was just the face of some invisible mentor. Banks questioned her creditworthiness. Investors whispered that a young woman wouldn't last 2 seasons in fashion's cutthroat world. Naomi answered by doubling down on quality, hand-stitching each seam, insisting on ethically sourced silks, and pricing her dresses just high enough to communicate exclusivity without crossing into pretension. Over 2 decades, Lumiere's revenue climbed steadily. The brand expanded into ready-to-wear, then accessories, then full home collections. She survived an economic downturn that shuttered dozens of her competitors by pivoting to an online-only capsule collection, then re-emerged stronger when the market recovered. By the end of last year, Lumiere Fashion Group reported $500 million, 0 cents in annual revenue, a milestone she'd once pictured on her garage wall as a sticky note dream. Naomi's chest swelled with pride at the memory, but there was always a twinge of loneliness beneath it. So many nights spent alone at that sewing machine. So many boardrooms where she was the sole woman or the sole minority. She'd learned to keep her head down, to let her work speak for her. Until today, when work wasn't enough. The whisper of cartwheels drew her back to the present. A different attendant, a tall man with a tidy mustache, stopped beside her. "Can I offer you a glass of our house rosé, ma'am?" he asked gently, as if offering comfort after witnessing a small grief. Naomi nodded, grateful for the courtesy. But the simple gesture reminded her that courtesy was a privilege, and she'd just been relegated beneath it. She toyed with the crystal flute he placed in front of her, the delicate bubbles rising like proof of something brighter, something she deserved. Closing her eyes for a moment, she let herself feel the ache of being underestimated, not just today, but every time someone assumed she was a token hire, a faceless CEO object. She thought of the countless times she'd seen her ideas redirected to colleagues with more gravitas, The times her authority was questioned by partners she'd taught how to sign billion-dollar contracts. Each slight had left an invisible scar, a quiet reminder that merit alone rarely protects you from bias. Yet these scars had also become her armor. She'd let each cut remind her why she built Lumiere this way, not for flattery, but for proof. Proof that she could turn imagination into an empire. Proof that a woman with nothing but determination and a keen eye could reshape an entire industry. The cabin door clicked shut, and the first-class door slide lit up. "Welcome aboard Pacific Wings." The announcement came through, calm and professional, but Naomi felt her pulse quicken. In less than an hour, this would be her world, too. Not just a place she flew through, but a company she owned. She opened her laptop, the soft glow illuminating her face. Emails from her legal team scrolled past. The acquisition documents, the final signatures, the escrow confirmation for $200 million 0 cents, all executed remotely while she sat here. It was almost poetic. She had the power to fire every person in this cabin who dared deny her a piece of Wagyu or a sip of champagne, and she would. But Naomi paused before typing her next instruction. She wasn't driven by vengeance, and she remembered her audience. The women and men who had watched her rise. The customers whose loyalty was built on respect. She imagined how a fairer, more inclusive Pacific Wings could serve every passenger, regardless of race or gender, with the same flawless dignity she demanded for herself. With a decisive click, she minimized the acquisition confirmation and reopened the document titled Pacific Wings, Culture and Inclusion Charter. The first bullet point: zero tolerance for discrimination. The second: mandatory diversity training for all crew. The third: transparent feedback channels for passengers. She read each line as though she were stitching another seam, ensuring every word fit perfectly into the narrative she wanted to tell. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Naomi inhaled deeply, letting resolve replace any lingering sting. Soon the moment of confrontation would pass, and a new chapter would begin, not just for her, but for everyone who stepped onto a Pacific Wings flight. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her skirt, and looked down the aisle with calm confidence. The world had underestimated her once too often. Today, she would set the standard. Naomi lifted her glass of rosé to her lips and let the cool bubbles chase away the lingering sting of humiliation. The cabin's muted hum wrapped around her like a protective cocoon. Soft jazz from the speakers overhead, the low whisper of engine thrust, hushed conversations drifting through the aisle. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the taste, reminding herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Then she heard it, a delicate hiss, barely above a breath. She opened her eyes and caught the blonde attendant, Karen Whitfield, leaning in toward her colleague, Bradley Thompson. "She probably doesn't even know how to savor true luxury," Karen murmured, voice laced with condescension. Bradley smirked, his dark eyes twinkling with amusement. "Yeah," he whispered back. "She's out of her element." Their words, meant to be private, drifted into Naomi's personal soundscape and landed like stones in her chest. Naomi froze, glass halfway to her lips. She watched Karen straighten up, smoothing her uniform skirt, her back turning to Naomi as though she'd just delivered the best punchline of the day. Behind Karen, near the galley entrance, stood Richard Palmer, flight supervisor and self-appointed captain of civility, hands clasped behind his back. His salt and pepper hair gleamed under the warm overhead lights, and the polished insignia on his lapel caught Naomi's eye. He scanned the cabin casually, but Naomi felt his gaze shift toward her, assessing her like a security detail vetting a target. Her heart pounded, not from fear, she was no stranger to conflict, but from that familiar surge of indignation. She'd built an empire from scratch, endured silent doubts and outright rebuffs in boardrooms and contract negotiations. Yet here, 38,000 feet above the ground, her authority evaporated with a whispered joke. Every instinct told her to stand up, to call them out, to demand equal treatment, but she hesitated. This was first class, where decorum was currency. A spectacle now would be tomorrow's headline, but would it change anything? Naomi took another sip of rosé, buying herself a breath. The glass felt sturdy in her hand, the liquid delicate and reassuring. She looked around. A gray-haired couple to her left chatted about their Tokyo itinerary. A bespectacled banker to her right leafed through the in-flight magazine, oblivious. No one else seemed to notice the slight, or if they did, they chose to look away. That silent complicity, that refusal to intervene, cut deeper than any insult. She remembered a boardroom 2 years earlier, when a senior partner had asked to see the real CEO, as though she were merely a figurehead for some unseen man. She'd smiled, handed over her business card, and let her sales numbers speak. They'd come back with renewed respect. But on this plane, there were no spreadsheets, no projections, just two attendants who thought her presence an inconvenience. Naomi set her glass down, the soft click echoing in the belled hush of first class. She needed information. Was it policy to prioritize elite frequent flyers over a paying first-class passenger, or was this personal? She panned the cabin. Champagne flutes clinked at neighboring tables. Petite plates of caviar were passed around like party favors. Her own empty tray table felt like an accusation. "Excuse me," she called out softly, voice projecting just enough to carry without raising the cabin temperature. Karen turned, face composed but eyes narrowed. Naomi continued evenly, "Could you please clarify your service policy? I'd like to understand why some passengers receive premium menu items while others do not." Richard Palmer appeared beside Karen almost instantly, his presence a silent assertion of authority. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" he asked, expression polite but firm. Naomi met his gaze directly, refusing to shrink. "Just clarification," she said. "I booked first class and pre-ordered these items weeks ago. I was told Wagyu beef and Dom Perignon would be available." Richard's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "We reserve certain items for our highest tier of elite status," he explained, voice level. "It's in our service guidelines." He paused, then added, "If you continue to press, we may need to involve airport security upon landing." The unspoken threat hung between them like storm clouds. Naomi felt the familiar heat of anger rise in her cheeks, but she held it in check. This wasn't about Wagyu. This was about respect. She pressed her palms flat on the armrests, drawing strength from the weight of her own fingers. "Thank you for the information," she replied, voice calm. "I'll review the guidelines when I deplane." As Richard moved away, Naomi exhaled slowly. She could almost feel the lines between allies and adversaries crystallize in the cabin's ambient glow. The conflict was no longer a whispered aside. It was out in the open, marked by that veiled threat of security. But Naomi didn't flinch. In her mind, she replayed the sequence: the whispered condescension, the supervisor's looming figure, the empty table before her. Each detail was a piece of evidence in the story she was about to tell, not just to them, but to the world. She picked up her rose again, fingers steady. The ride was far from over, and the next move was hers. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Naomi let the tension settle into a purposeful determination. She may have been underestimated in that moment, but she would not be underestimated again. This was no longer a mere dining dispute. It was the opening salvo in a battle for dignity, one she intended to win on her own terms. Naomi noticed the subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere long before anyone spoke. Richard Palmer, the flight supervisor, had moved from the galley entrance to stand just outside Naomi's row. His posture was erect, shoulders squared, and in his hand he clutched a small handheld radio. An unspoken threat, more potent than any raised voice. Across from Naomi, Karen Whitfield gently dusted invisible crumbs from her white-gloved hands. Her smile was all courtesy, but her eyes were sharp knives. Naomi had seen that look before, the look of someone who believed they held all the power. Bradley Thompson hovered nearby, arms folded, watching Naomi, as though she were an experiment gone off-screen. The cabin lights were dimmed for cruising, and the only illumination came from tiny overhead reading lamps. The soft hum of the engines created an almost cathedral-like hush, broken only by the muted click of seatbelts and the occasional whisper. Naomi felt the pressure build around her, a tightening coil of tension. Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat in a measured, professional way. "Miss Bennett," he said, voice low but carrying just enough to reach her ears. "I'm going to ask you once more to refrain from disrupting our service standards." He tilted his head toward Karen. "If you have further concerns, please wait until we land, and we'll have airport security address them." Naomi's heart skipped, but her expression remained composed. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and met his gaze steadily. "Disrupting service?" she repeated, voice soft. "I merely asked for what I ordered. The Wagyu and Dom Perignon were part of my reservation." Karen stepped in. "Our priority is serving passengers with elite status first, ma'am." She offered Naomi a ladylike nod. "We have guidelines that we follow." Naomi's jaw clenched slightly. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks. Not anger exactly, but a fierce determination. She thought of every boardroom she'd entered where her input had been second-guessed, her presence questioned. She thought of her team back in LA, of the email confirmations and wire transfers that had locked in her upcoming acquisition. Here, she was suddenly vulnerable, subject to policies that felt arbitrary and personal. She leaned forward, hands resting on the armrests. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. "Then please, show me those guidelines," she said. "I'd like to understand precisely where it says a first-class passenger must forfeit premium menu items." Bradley bristled, stepping closer. "You're causing a scene, ma'am. We'd rather not have to escalate this." He glanced at the camera subtly mounted in the ceiling. "I'm sure the company wouldn't appreciate complaints about unruly behavior." Naomi's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of confrontation. She had never been the unruly type, but she refused to be gaslighted. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said evenly. "I'm here to fly first class, as I paid to do." Richard's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then I suggest you comply with our protocols." He tapped the radio. "Please remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight." Karen returned to her service cart, but Naomi could feel her gaze locked on Naomi's seat. Everywhere she looked, she saw the same story. Luxury plates in everyone's hands but hers. Discreet glances from passengers who didn't want to get involved. That silent complicity stung, far worse than any outright hostility. Naomi closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. She imagined the Pacific Wings terminal in Los Angeles, the private lounge she had reserved. She imagined the legal team waiting with final copies of the acquisition paperwork. She felt the familiar surge of authority coursing through her, calm, precise, inevitable. When she opened her eyes, she saw movement in the aisle. A young couple in 3C offered Naomi a sympathetic smile and mouthed, "I'm sorry." A frail older woman peered over her designer scarf, concern etched in her eyes. Small sparks of solidarity flickered around Naomi, reminders that not everyone in first class saw her as an interloper. Richard's voice cut through the tension. "Ms. Bennett, please." This is your final warning. His radio was silent now, but the threat of dialing up security still hung in the air. Naomi felt the coil inside her shift from tightness to resolve. She knew exactly how this would end, and exactly when she would make it end. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I'll respect your request and remain seated, but I will also make sure your headquarters knows how you served me today." Richard's eyebrows flicked up, but he said nothing. He and Karen retreated to the front of the cabin, leaving Naomi in a swirl of hushed murmurs and sympathetic glances. Once they were out of earshot, Naomi reached into her purse and pulled out a slim smartphone. With careful taps, she activated her secure connection to her legal counsel back in LA, the same counsel who was finalizing the $200 million 0 cents purchase of Pacific Wings. She typed a brief message. "Hostile crew? Policies unclear. Prepare to execute takeover upon landing. Hold security until then." She sent it and slipped the phone back into her purse. A small spark of satisfaction flickered. They thought they could bully her, intimidate her, but they were dealing with the wrong person. As the flight attendant service resumed, with everyone else finally enjoying their caviar, Naomi closed her eyes for a moment and let the soft jazz drift through her. She felt the tension recede, replaced by the cool certainty of someone who held all the cards. This wasn't about Wagyu. This was about respect. And she would get it, one way or another. The cabin lights dimmed further as the sun dipped below the Pacific horizon. Naomi leaned back, ready for whatever came next. The real reckoning was only just beginning. Naomi watched the aisle lights ripple from the service cart as Karen and Bradley exchanged a final, triumphant glance before moving on to the next passenger. The soft murmur of first-class conversations rose and fell around her, but Naomi felt an icy calm settle into her chest. She had come too far, built too much, to be cowed by a pair of overconfident attendants. She let the silence hang for a heartbeat longer than courteous, then spoke in a clear, controlled tone. "Excuse me, may I see your employee identification cards, please?" The cabin fell subtly quieter. A few heads turned. Even the soft jazz paused for a measure. Naomi's gaze cut through the humble opal lamps overhead, landing on Karen's composed facade. Karen froze mid-step, fingers lingering on a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Her perfectly painted smile frayed at the edges. "Ma'am," she began, but Naomi continued without hesitation. "I'd like to verify your status and the exact clause in Pacific Wings service manual you're using to deny a first-class passenger her pre-ordered menu items." Bradley's brow shot up. He opened his mouth, closed it, then cleared his throat. "Our company policy is quite clear," he stammered. "We prioritize elite members." Naomi raised one slender hand, palm flat. "First, the IDs." A bead of sweat sparkled at Karen's hairline. She palmed the lapel of her crisp uniform jacket, tugged it open, and fished for her badge. Naomi watched every movement, the tilt of the badge holder, the way the plastic caught the light, and the printed name. Karen Whitfield, flight attendant, employee, PW 1423. Bradley followed suit, though more reluctantly, sliding a laminated card across the aisle. Naomi caught the corners of the card as it passed, reading Bradley Thompson, flight attendant, PW 1568. She gave each card a delicate review, memorizing the numbers like evidence tags. Then Naomi nodded toward the galley doorway, where Richard Palmer lingered in the shadows, arms folded. "And I'd like to see your flight supervisor's credentials as well." Richard stepped forward, the radio at his belt clicking softly. With a deliberate movement, he unzipped an inner pocket and produced a silver-plated badge stamped Richard Palmer, Flight Supervisor, PW 0112. Naomi noted the weight of the metal in his hand. a token of authority he clearly revered. As Naomi slipped the cards into her leather portfolio, she felt the tide in the cabin shift. The tiny power dynamic they'd tried to wield evaporated. In its place was a quiet understanding. She had the right to be here, and they had crossed a line. At her shoulder, Emily Chen leaned in, the dim reading light falling across her face. Naomi hadn't realized Emily was listening so closely, but the VP from Pacific Investment Group met her gaze with an almost imperceptible smile. Emily shrugged one shoulder, as though to say, "I see you," and lowered her own lapel to reveal a crest Naomi recognized, the emblem of Lumiere Fashion Group's legal counsel. Naomi's pulse fluttered, not from surprise, but from vindication. Emily wasn't just a sympathetic fellow passenger. She was Naomi's covert ally, the one who had orchestrated the legal strategy behind Naomi's acquisition. The simple gesture confirmed that the battle they were about to wage was already joined. Naomi let her lips curve into a small, private smile. She slid her portfolio closed. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "That's all I needed to confirm." She leaned back as the attendants withdrew, replaced by the muted clink of cutlery and the soft pop of another passenger's champagne cork. The cabin's rhythm resumed, but Naomi felt the undercurrent of power, restored where it belonged, at her fingertips. She glanced around, noting the subtle affirmations she'd already earned. The older couple too rose back, exchanging approving nods, the venture capitalist stamping his name in a notepad, the young mother across the aisle offering an encouraging smile. Even in the world of mid-air etiquette, alliance could be found in whispered solidarity. Naomi tapped her portfolio's clasp, secure in the knowledge that every ID badge was now a testament to her authority. The next step was to challenge the policy. She would demand the written guidelines, catalog every breach, and prepare for the moment when she could present her case not as an affronted passenger, but as the majority owner of Pacific Wings. She reached for her glass, now refilled with a precise measure of rosé, and raised it in a quiet toast. To herself, to the women who had watched her climb, to the silent witnesses in the cabin who believed in equality long before the policy manual caught up. As the plane cruised smoothly toward its Pacific crossing, Naomi allowed herself a single triumphant thought. They had underestimated her once, but they would not make that mistake again. This was no longer just a matter of Wagyu and champagne. It was a reckoning, executed with cool precision and backed by every ounce of her hard-won power. And she was only getting started. Naomi felt the tension in the cabin shift like an electric charge. The power dynamic had already begun to tilt back in her favor after she'd quietly collected the IDs and exposed the arbitrary enforcement of policies. She leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly, as Karen and Bradley retreated to finish serving the rest of the cabin. Settlement had occurred, at least for the moment. But Naomi knew the first strike had to be decisive. A faint click drew her attention. Karen's elbow nudged the edge of Naomi's small side table as the attendant reached for another passenger's napkin. Before Naomi could react, a thin stream of sparkling water, left over from the earlier rose service, swept across the table. The moisture spread rapidly, soaking into the faux leather surface and dripping toward Naomi's designer portfolio, tucked neatly at her side, absorbed the dampness, the pages of documents inside threatening to warp. Time seemed to slow. Naomi's first instinct was shock, a brief flash of disbelief that someone so meticulous would be so careless or so cavalier. But the rational part of her mind clicked on immediately. This wasn't an accident. The way Karen looked away, the slightest hesitation when she saw Naomi's purse, the hardened set of Bradley's jaw as he glanced in her direction, it all pointed to deliberate sabotage. Without a word, Naomi reached into her lap and pulled out her smartphone. The thin case fit snugly in her palm. The recording app was already open, a secret shortcut she only ever used in emergencies. She tilted the phone just so, angling the camera toward the service cart and the backs of the two attendants, making sure to capture the spilled water and the guilty expressions that flickered across their faces. Karen looked up at Naomi, eyes widening. Naomi's gaze never faltered. She raised an eyebrow as though to say, "Didn't expect that, did you?" Bradley stiffened, caught between finishing his service and avoiding her stare. The rest of the cabin seemed to hold its breath, the ambient jazz suspended as the passengers sensed something significant unraveling in their midst. Naomi's fingers hovered over the record button for only a millisecond before she pressed start. The red dot in the corner of her screen glowed steadily as she panned from the wet spot on her table to Karen's retreating figure. She captured Bradley's impassive profile and even managed to catch Richard Palmer's reflection in the polished galley hatch, his posture stiff, his jaw set. This was her first real move, the opening salvo in a battle she intended to win. As the mist from the spill settled, Naomi lowered her phone and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation settle in her bones. She recalled every slight, every whispered insult, every policy cited to exclude her. All of it had led to this single act of evidence gathering, proof that would make her case unassailable. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to throw a tantrum. The silent recording would speak louder than any protest could. Naomi wiped a stray droplet from her portfolio and slid it onto her lap. Her breathing was measured, her posture impeccable. Other passengers quietly glanced her way, curiosity alight in their eyes. Some offered subtle nods of sympathy, a few frowned at the attendant's unprofessionalism. All of them now recognized that Naomi wasn't merely a passenger, she was a person, claiming her rightful respect. A soft ping from her phone notified Naomi that the recording had activated. She tapped the screen to confirm the file was saving securely, then minimized the app, hiding the evidence behind her email icon. She had no intention of confronting Karen in mid-air. That confrontation would come later, after she had deplaned and taken control. But the recording ensured that nothing said or done in these next few minutes could be erased. With complete composure, Naomi raised her glass of rosé in a small, deliberate gesture toward the nearest passenger, a silent thank you for their unspoken solidarity. She then placed the glass on her now damp table and straightened her skirt. The ambient hum returned, silverware clinking, muted laughter from the galley, the low thrum of the engines. Yet Naomi remained acutely aware that the undercurrent of this flight had changed irrevocably. In the heady aftermath of that single recording, Naomi allowed herself a brief, private smile. She had made the first move, turning a petty act of humiliation into incontrovertible evidence of discrimination. Her legal team would be ready, her counsel primed, to use this clip in every board meeting and press release to come. But for now, she folded her hands in her lap, leaning into the calm before the storm. The seatbelt sign pinged on again, signaling some minor turbulence ahead. Naomi laced her fingers together and exhaled, welcoming the slight bump in the cabin floor as a reminder she was still very much airborne, and still very much in command of her destiny. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had her resolve. This was her world too, and no spilled water or whispered prejudice would ever convince her otherwise. Naomi settled deeper into her seat, the cabin's soft glow wrapping around her shoulders like a cloak. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The endless blue sky beyond the window, the faint hum of the engines, the hushed conversations drifting through first class. All of it faded, replaced by the quiet click of her phone unlocking. She tapped the secure app icon, an unmarked slate square that only she and Zoe Washington knew meant Priority Council. In under 2 seconds, her call connected, and Zoe's calm voice answered without preamble. "Naomi?" "Go ahead," Naomi said, tone low enough that only Zoe could hear. She kept her gaze forward, studying the varnished walnut paneling on the seat back in front of her. That panel would soon belong to her, too. "There's a small complication in the final wire," Zoe reported. "Pacific Wing's old guard is pushing back. They want a 2-hour review." Naomi let a slow breath out, channeling the patience she'd cultivated over decades. "Use the escrow clause we discussed. Release the funds now. I want the full $200 million, 0 cents wired to your account within the next 10 minutes, no holdbacks." Zoe paused. "Understood. I'll confirm when it's done." "Perfect," Naomi said. "And Zoe, thank you." She ended the call and locked her phone. Her heart rate hadn't climbed. It stayed steady, a metronome of confidence. Behind her, Karen and Bradley continued their rounds, offering coffee refills and petit fours to oblivious passengers. Naomi sipped her rosé, noting how the glass caught the light, delicate bubbles floating upward like tiny reminders of everything at stake. She glanced at the leather-bound notebook on her tray table, Pacific Wings, Culture and Inclusion Charter. The first page bore her neat script. Zero tolerance for discrimination, mandatory diversity training, arranged passenger feedback, executive accountability. She tapped the binding lightly, as though assuring herself these words weren't just idealistic bullet points, but the new reality she was carving out. At this altitude, the stakes felt almost surreal. The cabin was a microcosm of the very culture she intended to reshape. Naomi allowed herself a brief survey of the cabin's occupants. To her left, the venture capitalist was now fully engaged in an animated discussion about blockchain. 2 rows ahead, a retired diplomat nodded off, reading glasses perched at the tip of his nose. No one seemed to suspect the real story unfolding at seat 2A. She closed the notebook and placed it beside her phone. Next to it lay her passport and Emirates co-branded credit card, proof of global reach and influence. Tonight, those would remain untouched. Her power was now measured in a different currency: influence, equity, and justice. The seatbelt sign pinged off again, signaling the end of turbulence, though a different kind of turbulence awaited on the ground. Naomi exhaled, smoothing her silk scarf. She had weathered far rougher storms, market crashes, product failures, boardroom betrayals. This was nothing compared to the years of building Lumiere fashion from the ground up. "Mr. Bennett," came a soft voice. She looked up to see the head flight attendant, his expression apologetic. "I believe your rose has been refilled." He offered a small tray of macarons in pastel hues. "And, should you wish, I can arrange for a platter of our standard menu items immediately." Naomi inclined her head. "Thank you. Yes, please." Her tone was gracious, an olive branch, a nod to civility. She glanced at her watch, still 20 minutes until descent. Ample time. As he moved away, Naomi pulled her phone back into her palm, scrolling to her messaging app. She typed a single line to Zoe. "Wire complete. Prepare press release draft emphasizing acquisition as catalyst for culture change. Will review on ground." She hit send, then tucked her phone away. The private terminal in Los Angeles was already buzzing with her legal team and PR advisors. They'd be ready the instant the jetway door opened. Naomi took a deliberate sip of her rosé, the chilled liquid smoothing out the last traces of irritation. She let her eyes drift to the LED reading lights, the subtle play of light and shadow dancing across her notebook's pages. This tentative pause was a necessary pause, a moment to gather strength before the final act. Her mind wandered to the women she'd mentored at Lumiere, the seamstresses who'd gone on to start their own labels, the interns who'd risen to director roles. the board members who'd once doubted but now championed her visions. This acquisition was for them, too. Proof that equity could be more than a slogan on a mission statement. It could be the lived experience of hundreds of passengers, crew, and stakeholders. At that thought, Naomi let a genuine smile touch her lips. She rose gracefully, adjusted her scarf, and stood from 2A. The cabin door thudded softly as first-class service concluded. Naomi glanced up at Richard Palmer, stationed near the front bulkhead. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting heartbeat, there was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. She offered him a small, measured nod. It wasn't a gesture of defeat or submission, but of inevitability, the old order yielding to the new. Then, Naomi turned and walked toward the aisle, passing startled passengers and service carts without breaking stride. Each step echoed the quiet authority she wore like a second skin. Behind her, the subtle hum of first class resumed its rhythm, but Naomi knew the harmony had been forever changed. The transaction was almost complete, the plan in motion, and all that remained was to touch down and claim what was hers. As she reached the bulkhead, Naomi took one last look at her seat. A throne she'd commanded with grace and precision. She pressed a button to exit recording mode, and her secure files locked automatically. No more evidence was needed on this flight. The real proof, she reflected, would be on the runway at LAX. The headlines, the equity transfer, the first board meeting under her leadership, and most importantly, the faces of every passenger and employee who would soon experience Pacific Wings anew, serving everyone with dignity, just as she deserved. Danny moved again and set his rifle aside on the scoundrel's polished wooden threshold, her silhouette framed against the cabin's warm light. The final descent was beginning, but her ascent, to reshape culture, to demand respect, to lead with conviction, was just taking flight. Naomi stepped off the jetway into Pacific Wings' private terminal and paused just inside the sliding glass doors. The quiet click of her heels on polished marble echoed in the hushed hall, as if the space itself recognized the moment's gravity. She inhaled the subtle scent of polished wood and fresh linens, then glanced to her right, where Emily Chen stood, arms folded, dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit that could have graced any courtroom. As Naomi approached, Emily offered a small, knowing smile. "Welcome to your new territory," she said, voice warm but firm. They were alone, the rest of the crew and ground staff having cleared the area at Naomi's prior instruction. Only the three attendants, Karen Whitfield, Bradley Thompson, and Richard Palmer, remained, looking stiff in their uniforms. Naomi folded her arms and met Emily's gaze. "Go ahead," she said softly. Emily reached up and peeled back her lapel, revealing an embossed silver badge. General Counsel, Lumiere Fashion Group. Beneath the badge, a crisp business card peeked from a hidden pocket. Naomi's heartbeat quickened, not from surprise, but from the sweet confirmation that her silent ally had the authority she needed. Karen's jaw slackened, and Bradley's eyes widened as the realization dawned. Richard shifted his weight, brow furrowing in confusion. Naomi watched their faces carefully. Every flicker of doubt, every crack in their composure was a testament to the power they had misjudged. Emily held the badge aloft for all to see. "I've been Naomi's counsel since the very beginning of this transaction. I've drafted, negotiated, and executed the documents while posing as a fellow passenger." She paused, letting her words settle. "And as of 30 minutes ago, Miss Bennett here owns 60% of Pacific Wings, acquired for $200 million, 0 cents. A stunned silence followed. Karen's perfectly arranged hair seemed suddenly out of place against her slack expression. "Wha? You can't..." she began, voice trembling. Naomi cut in, voice low but unwavering. You can, and I have. She turned slightly toward Richard, whose polished badge now looked like a child's toy next to Emily's. Richard Palmer, Flight Supervisor, Employee, PW No 12. You report to me now. That badge you cherish is on my payroll. Richard's face flushed red. He glanced at his two underlings for support, but Karen tilted her head away, as though avoiding his gaze. Bradley swallowed audibly, speechless. Naomi stepped forward, letting every inch of her presence radiate calm authority. I gave you the benefit of the doubt, called for your IDs, asked for policies, let you save face. But you chose petty humiliation over courtesy. Now you'll face the consequences. She tapped her phone against her portfolio. My legal team is live streaming this entire exchange to our board. 1 minute later, we filed immediate termination notices and forwarded them to HR. By the time this ends, your contracts will be revoked, your privileges revoked, and you'll be escorted off company property. Bradley's shoulders slumped. Ms. Bennett, please. You're free to submit an appeal, Naomi interrupted, but the process will be overseen by Diversity and Inclusion, chaired by Emily Chen. Emily gave a small nod. Our first order of business? Mandatory anti-bias workshops for every remaining staff member. You three will also participate as case studies, anonymized of course, but your actions will be discussed in front of every department head. Karen's mouth opened and closed, as though she were trying to form words out of thin air. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask, Naomi replied gently. You assumed that because I didn't belong, you could decide my worth. That ends now. She turned to Bradley. Mr. Thompson, you'll forward any salvageable belongings to your home address. Meanwhile, you three will wait here until security arrives. Richard's face twisted with indignation. This is a vendetta, an abuse of wealth and privilege. Naomi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was far too cold for that. Privilege? I built everything you see here from the ground up. As for wealth, I've leveraged mine to create genuine opportunity, not to hide behind fancy uniforms. You, on the other hand, used your position to strip away someone else's dignity for sport. That, sir, is a crime of character. A hush fell again. The corridors outside were quiet. Even the security team waited respectfully down the hall. Naomi felt the moment stretch, sealing itself into memory. Then she did something unexpected. She extended her hand to Karen. I'm sorry it had to come to this, but I believe people can learn from their mistakes. You can choose to be better. Karen stared at the hand as though it were a trinket. Bradley and Richard, too, seemed uncertain. Finally, with a trembling sigh, Karen nodded and grasped Naomi's hand. The contact was brief, but charged. An acknowledgement that the old order was broken and a new one was forming. Naomi released her grip and turned back to Emily. Thank you, she said quietly. We couldn't have done this without you. Emily tucked the badge back beneath her lapel and placed the business card in Naomi's palm. Always, she replied. Welcome to the helm. As Naomi pocketed the card, she looked at the three attendants one last time. Gentlemen and lady, that will be all. She turned on her heel and strode down the hallway toward her waiting car, head held high, silhouette bathed in the glow of terminal lights. Behind her, Karen, Bradley, and Richard remained frozen, the magnitude of their error etched in every line of their posture. Naomi nearly smiled at the tableau. Three figures trapped by their own prejudice. In that private terminal, under the soft lights of an empty gate, Naomi Bennett reclaimed more than just her dignity. She reclaimed the narrative itself, one in which respect and equality weren't privileges to be granted, but rights to be upheld. For every passenger, everywhere. And as she disappeared around the corner, Emily's words lingered in the air. This was only the beginning. Naomi lifted her tablet, sleek, backlit by the terminal's soft fluorescent glow, and tapped the secure folder labeled Immediate Termination Orders. The document list glowed on screen. Richard Palmer, Flight Supervisor, PW0012. Karen Whitfield, Senior Flight Attendant. Pilot, PW1423. Radley Thompson, Flight Attendant, PW1568. She reviewed the text one last time. Breach of conduct, creation of hostile environment, gross discrimination. Under the terms of Pacific Wing's bylaws, now hers to enforce, these offenses warranted immediate dismissal without severance. With a steady finger, she hit send to HR and security. A subtle chime confirmed dispatch. Naomi slipped the tablet into her leather portfolio, inhaling slowly. She turned toward the group of onlookers. Ground operations managers, security officers in crisp uniforms, and a handful of curious passengers who'd lingered behind. All eyes drifted to her, half with surprise, half with awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice measured but carrying through the quiet hall. "I've just effected a leadership change in Pacific Wing's cabin crew. Effective immediately, Mr. Palmer, Ms. Whitfield, and Mr. Thompson are no longer employees of this airline." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. The security team snapped to attention, referencing their handheld systems. Two officers advanced toward the three former crew members, who now stood at the center of the terminal's soft-carpeted aisle. Naomi watched their faces. Richard's mouth hung open as though the words were strangers on his tongue. Karen's eyes brimmed with shock. Bradley stared at the ground, jaw clenched. "Please gather your personal belongings," the nearest officer instructed. He produced a sterile white folder, HR's printed termination notice, and handed it to Richard. A second officer offered identical folders to Karen and Bradley. The attendants accepted, hands trembling. Naomi noted the precise calm of security's movements, every step choreographed, every gesture efficient. She allowed a moment for the scene to settle into the hushed silence that follows any seismic shift. Then, Naomi spoke again. "Pacific Wing's reputation rests on equal dignity for every customer and crew member alike. Discrimination will not be tolerated, by passengers or by employees." Her gaze swept the room, making eye contact with each staff member present. "Today's actions demonstrate our commitment. We're instituting mandatory anti-bias training and a transparent reporting system. Details will follow from HR." A young gate agent, her badge reading Sophie Newen, stepped forward, voice respectful. "Ms. Bennett, can you confirm when these policies take effect?" Naomi nodded. "Immediately. All crew and ground staff will begin the training next week. We'll also launch a 24/7 hotline for any incidents, anonymous if preferred." She allowed a slight smile. "We're creating a culture where respect is the norm, not the exception." A ripple of approval went through the onlookers. Quiet nods, a few grateful smiles from passengers still lingering behind. Naomi felt the familiar warmth of solidarity that only comes when you stand for something bigger than yourself. The security officers gently guided Richard, Karen, and Bradley toward the exit doors. Naomi watched as the trio passed under the terminal's glowing exit sign, their uniforms still pressed, their name badges glinting in the light, earmarks of an authority they no longer had. As they reached the doors, Richard paused and looked back, eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. Naomi stood unwavering, his expression shifted. Rage gave way to a grudging acknowledgement. The woman he'd underestimated held all the power now. Behind Naomi, Emily Chen emerged from the periphery. Her presence was steady, professional. She offered a discreet nod, a sign that legal had everything under control. Naomi met Emily's gaze and inclined her head. No words were needed. The legal team had already archived the recorded audio, collected the IDs, and prepared the press package. The firing was airtight. "Thank you, everyone," Naomi said, turning to the assembled Pacific Wings staff. "Let's continue serving our passengers with the excellence they deserve." She stepped forward, extending her hand to the gate agent Sophie. "And thank you, Sophie, for your support." Sophie shook Naomi's hand, eyes bright with admiration. Naomi took a final look at the empty spaces where the three attendants had stood. For a moment, she felt the weight of every underhanded glance, every whispered slight that had led to this reckoning. Then she let it pass. Today was about new beginnings. She gathered her portfolio and tablet, slipping past the echo of her own footsteps. As she exited the private terminal, a press photographer, invited earlier by the PR team, caught her image through the glass pane, poised, resolute, every inch the leader she'd built herself to be. Outside, the California sun was dipping low, painting the tarmac gold. Naomi paused, inhaling the warm air. In the distance, Pacific Wings' white and U jet stood ready for its next departure. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Change doesn't unfold in a single moment. It's the result of countless decisions, each one demanding courage. As she walked toward her car, Naomi reflected on the arc of power, from being denied a Wagyu steak to wielding the authority to reshape an airline's culture. It had taken 2 hours of strategic moves, collecting evidence, finalizing the acquisition wire, revealing her ownership, and executing termination orders. But the result was transformative. She slid into the back seat of her waiting vehicle, the leather cool beneath her fingertips. The door closed softly, sealing in the moment. Naomi looked out at the runway, where planes taxied under the dying light. This was only the beginning. A campaign of dignity and respect stretching from this private terminal to every Pacific Wings cabin across the globe. With a final glance at her reflection in the window, Naomi lifted her chin. She had claimed her authority, enforced her vision, and set a new course. The journey ahead would demand vigilance and unwavering integrity, but then she was no stranger to steering through turbulence. And today, she'd proved that real power isn't about entitlement. It's about ensuring everyone's right to be treated with respect. Naomi watched the breaking news alert on her phone as she sat in her car, idling under the terminal canopy. The headline scrolled in bold letters, "Pacific Wings CEO's in-flight firing goes viral. Justice takes flight." She tapped the link and saw the clip. 3 cabin crew members being handed termination letters in the private terminal, their stunned expressions and Naomi's composed posture playing on an endless loop. Within an hour, the video had been reshared over 500,000 times on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Hashtags like Pacific Wings Justice, Equal Treatment, and Black Owens trended nationally. Traditional outlets, CNN, BBC World, and CNBC picked it up next, running segments that framed Naomi's actions as a landmark moment in corporate accountability. Even the Wall Street Journal ran a sidebar, "When Power Meets Principle, How Naomi Bennett Reshaped an Airline in 60 Minutes." Naomi exhaled, folded her hands in her lap, and closed her eyes for a moment. This was exactly the result she'd planned. Public opinion would back her zero-tolerance policy, and the world would see that Pacific Wings meant business. But she also knew the narrative could spin out of control. Some quarters would frame her as a vengeful tyrant wielding wealth to destroy lives. That's why the next step was crucial. She unlocked her secure comms app and sent a short message to Zoe Washington. "Media team ready for statement in 5 min. Focus on accountability, culture change, passenger safety. A prompt reply came. On it, live stream set up at 3 p.m. Pacific. Naomi reviewed her talking points. Acknowledgement of public interest. I understand why people are watching. Emphasis on policy over personality. This wasn't about personal vendetta. Data-driven impact. Passenger satisfaction scores have risen 40% in test cabins. Forward-looking vision. Our commitment to diversity and inclusion is here to stay. She scrolled through comments. Finally, someone stood up. She's making history. What a boss move. Alongside them, a few negative takes. She went too far. Reverse discrimination. Naomi let those wash over her without flinching. Controversy drove engagement, and engagement drove awareness of the new standards. 5 minutes later, she stepped out of the car and onto the red-carpeted walkway leading to the Pacific Wings Press Center. Reporters from Reuters, AP, and local news crews lined the entrance. Microphones clustered before the podium, each bearing a station logo. Naomi paused at the top of the stairs, adjusted her tailored navy blazer, and let a calm, confident smile settle on her lips. She approached the podium, cleared her throat, and began. Good afternoon. I'm Naomi Bennett, CEO of Pacific Wings. Earlier today, we took decisive action against 3 employees whose conduct violated our core values of respect and equality. I know many of you have seen the video. Transparency is important to me, so let me speak plainly. Cameras clicked, the midday sun glinted off the microphone array. This decision was not made lightly or in retaliation. Rather, it reflects our zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, one that we are committing to uphold across every level of our organization. Starting today, all Pacific Wings employees will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. We are also launching a new reporting hotline, staffed 24/7 by an independent third party, to ensure any concerns are addressed immediately. She paused, letting the weight of those words land. I recognize that for some, our actions may seem extreme, but make no mistake. Every passenger deserves equal treatment. Our data shows that where similar policies have been piloted, customer satisfaction rose by 40% and repeat bookings increased by 18%. Respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. A reporter raised her hand. Naomi nodded. Yes? Reporter, critics say you abused your power by firing these employees on the spot. How do you respond? Naomi leveled her gaze. I have spent my career building equitable opportunities. If my wealth and position can't protect me from prejudice, they shouldn't protect anyone. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability. Those employees were given every chance to comply with policy, yet chose to ignore it. She shifted tone, leaning into empathy. To anyone who has experienced discrimination, on a flight, in a boardroom, or elsewhere, know that we stand with you. Today's actions are a message. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Pacific Wings will be a leader in inclusive service, and we hope other companies follow suit. With that, she thanked the assembly and stepped back, allowing the press team to take over. The cameras followed her as she mingled briefly with senior staff, exchanging nods and quiet congratulations. Zoe Washington slipped beside her, whispering, "Well done." The feed's going global. 150 countries and counting. Naomi smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. She watched as people shared selfies with her in the background, their captions echoing her message. Dignity first. Equality at 40,000 feet. CEO who cares. As she exited the press area, Naomi felt a familiar surge of purpose. The day's events would reverberate for weeks, sparking debates on talk shows and boardrooms alike. But for Naomi, it was never about the headlines. It was about people feeling seen and respected. A mission she'd started in a garage decades ago and was now scaling to an entire airline. She walked toward the waiting car, her heels clicking on the marble once more. The buzz of her phone resumed. Interviews to schedule, social media strategy calls, shareholder updates. But in her mind, she was already looking ahead. The first board meeting under her leadership, where she'd present detailed metrics on service equality, new routes to launch, partnerships to form, and a culture to nurture. As the car pulled away, Naomi glanced back at the terminal, bathed in golden afternoon light. Pacific Wing's logo gleamed on the facade, a reminder that symbols mean little without the people who live up to them. She closed her eyes and smiled, ready for the next chapter in a story she was determined to write, with integrity, compassion, and unwavering resolve. Naomi stood behind the podium in Pacific Wing's new headquarters, an airy glass atrium overlooking LA's skyline. Sunlight filtered through the Florida-illing windows, casting a warm glow on the assembled reporters, employees, and a handful of invited passengers. At her side, Emily Chen, now in a smart navy sheath dress and blazer, offered a calm, supportive smile. Naomi tapped the microphone. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Pacific Wing's launch of our Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, our commitment to ensure respect and equality for every passenger and employee." She paused, letting the applause settle. "I'm pleased to announce that Emily Chen will be our first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer." Emily stepped forward, giving a modest nod. Naomi continued, "Emily has been with us in spirit since yesterday, serving as my counsel and co-pilot through one of the most transformative moments in this airline's history. Today, she officially takes the helm of our D&I efforts, charged with shaping policy, overseeing training, and ensuring transparency at every level." A reporter raised her hand. Naomi nodded toward her. "Yes." Reporter, "Mrs. Bennett, why create a dedicated D&I office now, and why Emily?" Naomi smiled. "Because meaningful change requires more than intention. It needs structure, accountability, and leadership, with both authority and empathy." Emily's background in corporate law and her experience in advocacy make her uniquely qualified. She understands the legal framework, but more importantly, she understands people. Emily leaned in, addressing the crowd. "Thank you, Naomi. My first priority is rolling out our zero tolerance for discrimination policy. Effective immediately, any employee found to engage in biased behavior, whether overt or subtle, will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. We've also established a Diverse Voices Council, made up of employees and passenger representatives, to review cases and recommend improvements monthly." Naomi interjected. "And for our passengers, we're launching a 24/7 inclusion hotline, staffed by independent counselors who will receive and investigate reports confidentially. We're also piloting an in-flight feedback app, so you can rate every aspect of your service, down to the slightest interaction, with real-time data feeding back to our crew managers." She glanced at Emily. "We'll begin mandatory bias awareness and cultural competency training for all Pacific Wing's employees next week. We're partnering with the Global Equality Institute to deliver a curriculum that's rigorous, interactive, and tailored to the unique environment of aviation." In the audience, a senior flight attendant nodded thoughtfully. Naomi continued, "We're not stopping there. By Q3, we'll share quarterly reports on passenger satisfaction, broken down by demographic, so you can see the impact of these changes. Transparency is key. We owe that to our customers and to each other." Another hand shot up, this time from a Wall Street Journal correspondent. "Reporter, some critics say this is a PR stunt. How can you prove it's more than that?" Naomi set her shoulders square. "I understand the skepticism, Actions speak louder than words. That's why, by the end of this quarter, we're committing to specific metrics. A 35% reduction in discrimination complaints. A 20% increase in positive first-hand reviews on service quality. Full completion of D&I training by 100% of staff. She let the numbers hang. And we welcome independent audits to verify our progress. If we fall short, we'll revise our approach. Our passengers' trust is the ultimate measure of success. Emily stepped forward again. We've also created a recognition program to highlight employees who exemplify inclusive service, monthly awards, public acknowledgments, and professional development opportunities. This isn't about punishment alone. It's about celebrating those who make dignity a daily practice. Naomi turned back to the podium. Pacific Wings has always prided itself on exceptional safety, punctuality, and comfort. Today we add equity and respect to that list. Our vision is that no passenger ever feels less than because of who they are. She looked across the room, making eye contact with several uniformed crew members. To our own people, thank you for joining us on this journey. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Together, we'll set a new industry standard, one where every passenger is served with the same grace and professionalism. A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Naomi added, "And to our passengers, thank you for holding us to your highest expectations. You deserve nothing less." With that, she stepped aside and presented Emily with a glass globe, an engraved award symbolizing Pacific Wings' commitment to global inclusion. Emily accepted it, eyes misting slightly, and raised it for everyone to see. The room erupted into applause, warm, genuine, and sustained. Naomi watched Emily stand tall, holding that globe like a torch. This was more than a press event. It was the beginning of a cultural turnaround that would ripple beyond the clouds. As the applause died down, Naomi and Emily took questions in a lively Q&A, fine-tuning details on flight attendant schedules, crew feedback loops, and passenger advisory panels. Reporters lingered, capturing quotes and soliciting interviews. Finally, Naomi closed the session. "Thank you all for coming. Today we turn a page. Pacific Wings will soar, not just on jet fuel, but on respect and inclusion. Let's make sure every flight reflects that promise." She stepped away from the podium, Emily by her side. Together they walked toward the exit, a confident pair ready to transform an industry. One policy, one training session, and one satisfied passenger at a time. 6 months have passed since Naomi Bennett's decisive in-fleet takeover of Pacific Wings, and the change is more than headline news. It's the new reality at 40,000 feet. Standing on the bridge of Pacific Wings' redesigned first-class cabin, Naomi watched a trio of passengers settle into plush leather seats. The cabin's interior had been overhauled with warmer tones, screamy neutrals and soft walnut accents, reflecting a more welcoming atmosphere. A discreet placard at each seatback now invited feedback via the new in-flight app, and within moments, Naomi saw the first positive ratings pop up. Excellent service, felt truly welcome, champagne and caviar on par. In their aggregate, passenger satisfaction in first class had climbed by 40%, while overall repeat bookings had risen 20%. Figures that once sounded aspirational but now glowed in her monthly report. She leaned in, catching a word of genuine gratitude from an older couple whose experience mirrored that of countless others. Just yesterday, their comment read, "We felt respected for the first time on an international flight." That single testimonial echoed 1,000 quiet victories. The steward who offered a warm welcome to a black airline mechanic. The attendant who anticipated a non-English speaker's needs. The supervisor who genuinely thanked a passenger for feedback. Naomi smiled. And not because of the numbers, but because of what they represented. A culture shift that went beyond policy to heart. She remembered the day she'd been forced to see IDs mid-flight. The water spilt across her documents. Back then, she'd felt small in her own world. Now, she moved through the cabin as someone who belonged everywhere. Behind her, Emily Chen walked by, clipboard in hand. "We've got the quarterly metrics from our Diversity and Inclusion Council," Emily said, voice low enough for only Naomi to hear. "Complaints down 60%, crew-initiated interventions up 50%, and our scholarship program has 320 applications so far, exceeding expectations." Naomi nodded. The Marcus Bennett Scholarship for Underrepresented Students in Aviation was one of her proudest initiatives. She'd seeded it with $5 million, 0 cents, inviting applications from students who might never have considered a career at 30,000 feet. Already, Emily's team had reviewed dozens of essays about overcoming barriers. From a single parent in Atlanta to a first-generation immigrant in Seattle, the scholarship was more than charity. It was proof that opportunity could start with a single act of inclusion. Their moment of quiet celebration was interrupted by the gentle ding of Naomi's secure phone. A text from Zoe Washington. "Board meeting in 15, positive momentum. We're on track to break even on new routes by Q4. Naomi allowed herself a satisfied smirk. Financially and culturally, Pacific Wings was stronger than ever. Pausing at a window that framed the runway, she watched a narrow-body jet taxi by. She thought of the journey, the humiliation in Tokyo, the secret counsel in her seat, the private terminal showdown, the viral firing clip, the press conferences, the training workshops, the scholarship launch. It had all stemmed from one moment of injustice and one decision to demand accountability. A flight attendant approached, offering her a fluted glass of Dom Perignon. Naomi accepted, raising the glass in a small salute. "To respect," she said softly. "May it never be out of stock." Across the aisle, a young flight engineer recognized her and offered a shy wave. He'd been part of the test cabin that piloted the new service guidelines, another reminder that change belonged to everyone. Naomi returned the wave. She had built a culture where dignity wasn't a perk, but a promise. As the cabin prepared for descent, Naomi settled back, letting the moment wash over her. She thought of the viewers, the 55 to 75-year-old men and women who watched Karma tell tales with bated breath, eager for justice delivered not with violence but with authority and quiet power. This epilogue wasn't just about a CEO avenging a slight. It was about systemic transformation, fueled by one person's refusal to accept the unacceptable. The seatbelt sign pinged on. Naomi's phone chimed again. A news alert that Pacific Wings stock had ticked up 12% after a string of favorable analyst reports citing innovative culture change. She set the phone aside. The real story was written in every respectful interaction her crew now offered. Moments later, the runway lights blurred beneath them as the plane descended into LAX. Naomi watched the city's skyline come into view, the city where she'd started her fashion line in a Santa Monica garage decades ago. The city where she now led an airline, rewriting its legacy. As the wheels touched ground, Naomi closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The journey of justice was never over, but today she knew its course had changed forever. With respect enshrined in policy, training, scholarship, and everyday service, Pacific Wings would carry forward the promise that dignity is not situational, it's universal. And for Naomi Bennett, that promise was the flight she'd charted for the world.